Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Okay, we are back. What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. I want to welcome on. You may know him on Twitter as Colts Film Room. We have Ben joining us here from thebluestable.com. Ben, thanks for jumping on, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Appreciate you having me.
Good, man. Well, surviving the cold, I'll tell you that. It's
brutal.
Everywhere. I don't know where your area is, but I know near Indy, it's been brutal, man.
Yeah. Oh, it's bad. It's bad all over the Northeast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, I don't know if you were able to catch Lou Anarumo's press conference today, but man, there was so much good stuff that I love to hear from him. But I know we've kind of been talking about it, and we've been going back and forth on X a little bit about it, and people have been talking about it as well. Who are some of those players that, with Lou Anarumo now being named defensive coordinator, you think are going to be positively impacted by this hiring? So I wanted to kind of talk about that. And I think we have a couple players in mind that come to mind immediately. But curious for you, who are some of those guys that you look at and you look at his system, the things he's going to do that are different from Gus Bradley? And what would you say are some of the guys for you that you point to?
Yeah, well, I think it's really easy when you have these conversations. You're like, good player is going to fit in any scheme, right? So you start thinking about all the good players that that are already on this defense. But I think one that immediately came to mind the second, and I tweeted this out the second I found out that Lou was the coordinator, was Kenny Moore. And I think that's been the popular answer. And I think the best reason for that is because Kenny has been in 3 different defenses now for Indiana, potentially 4. If you count 2017. So he's been through a lot of a journey in Indianapolis. And I think that what you saw him in Eberflus's defense is really when he became who they thought Kenny Moore could be, where he has this very dynamic nature to how he plays, being able to show pressure and back out, being able to be a huge part of the disguise element. And then, kind of when Gus Bradley got here, he became more of a static player, a guy where like, hey, you're going to line and cover the slot receiver. You're going to line to the passing strength every time. And this is how you're going to play. And I think that is where I know that there were some quotes around that first season where Kenny was a little bit frustrated about maybe potentially his role or where he fit in this defense and didn't think he was being who the coaching staff needed to be. And I think there was something about them clicking together. I think now that we're moving to Lou's scheme and what he's done potentially with the player with Mike Hilton, this is a very nickel-centric defense where not to get too technical, but a lot of quarterbacks are looking at that nickel player to gauge what the coverage is going to be. And Kenny, I think now will be able to be a huge part in how they're always changing the picture and creating kind of some uncertainty for the quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it did feel like, when quarterbacks lined up against the Colts, they kind of already knew what was going to happen, before the snap even happened. So I definitely love that. And, I was just thinking about that. I was like, it's been a long time since we've seen Kenny Moore. Obviously the reference to Mike Hilton, Kenny Moore coming off on the blitz. It's been a while. So that definitely will be a positive thing there. And obviously Kenny, when actually before it was announced, Kenny was seemingly pretty happy about it. So, yeah, absolutely. Kenny Moore is that first name that comes to mind. I think another guy that comes to mind immediately, and Lou talked about it today in his press conference, is Laiatu Latu. And, what he did, and obviously last year with, some people have talked about the lack of snaps that he got and all of these different things. But, a guy that potentially coming into year 2 could have, a nice, sophomore jump here. So what are your thoughts there on Latu and maybe the fit he could serve here in this defense?
Yeah, I think that's a great one as well. I think, Lou getting here, it's not like he can sprinkle magic fairy dust and Laiatu Latu just has 17 sacks like Trey Henderson, right? There's a lot of individual technique that you have to work on that he has to develop on to be that type of player. What I do think is that kind of what he's going to do from a schematic perspective in creating that uncertainty for the quarterback is going to help buy some time for this defensive line to get home. I thought, like, when I was watching this year and kind of during this process, thinking about what direction the Colts were going to go into, I think the biggest thing that we could all see is the off and soft coverage where they were getting eaten alive by quick game passing concepts, 3-step drop passing concepts that the defensive line couldn't get home. So everyone kind of attributes this defensive line as regressing when the coverage was just that easy to manipulate and exploit this year, that I think that for the pure fact that they're going to be changing the picture more on the back end and creating that uncertainty, I think that's going to buy some time for Latu to get some of the sacks that we didn't see in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. You look at the numbers, and again, this is the thing, and I've said it for a while. Like, pure numbers aren't a bad thing, but they can often not tell the full story. And I think definitely in the case of that, you're 100% right. Who are some other guys that you're looking at here? That those are like kind of the two popular names, but who are some other guys that you're looking and saying this could be a good fit for them? Maybe they either didn't fit well, or maybe this will just help excel their game further. Who are some other guys you're looking at and saying this could be a positive thing for them?
Well, I tweeted it out today, and I think this is one that no one's really talking about. Jalen Carlies. I think that's going to be – the Colts are kind of in a situation at linebacker, and the precedent certainly stands where they don't commit to linebackers very often. I mean, you saw kind of what had happened with Anthony Walker, what had happened with Bobby Okereke. When they feel like, in my opinion – I'm guessing here, but I would assume that they feel like they can draft and develop linebackers really well and have been since Chris Ballard has gotten here, that they haven't felt the need to kind of – that's the one position that they've consistently been replenishing. And with EJ Speed on the open market, I think that's going to leave some room for Jalen Carlies to step in as that second linebacker when they play nickel defense. And I think kind of in Lou's scheme where they will – ask guys to you kind of need some of that athleticism and that ability to redirect, which is in change of direction skills. I think that that's something that Jalen Carlies, as the former safety, can bring. So I was really encouraged kind of by that Tennessee game and him stepping into that role. And I very well could see a scenario where we're looking into free agency and he's the guy that the Colts are really counting on to take that next step, because I think he would be a great fit in more of a scheme that isn't, I know that there's been a lot of talk kind of about the coverage ability of our linebackers. And I think that one thing that you can say there is it's pretty hard to play perfect coverage when the quarterback knows where you're going to be on every single snap. So I think changing that up will help maybe a guy like Zaire Franklin, maybe a guy like Grant Stewart, should they bring him back, and then Jalen Carlies if he does elevate to that next role.
Do you have any concern? Because obviously he, making the switch from safety last year, he still learning that position. And I know he obviously had some flashes. Are you concerned at all with that lack of experience from Jalen Carlies to kind of just say, hey, here, you're the next guy, up? Would you add any competition in there at all?
Absolutely. I think that one thing that I'm sure we'll get to is the importance of depth in this defense. But the one thing that I think is also important to know as we, a lot of people are getting excited about this hire, excited about the change on defenses. It's not easy to learn two systems in 2 years. So this is a second system that he's going to have to learn. He probably just finished learning Gus Bradley's, considering he was also injured for part of the season as well. So it's not something that you can just point blank count on by any means. But I do think the talent and the athletic ability is there to be able to fit. Now, I do think that you'll see consistently, and I'm sure we can talk about this later, about them bringing in competition at all three levels, really. But I think when you look at just his pure athletic ability and then his ability to read the quarterback, kind of coming from that safety background, I think that's something that could really fit in this defense.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And obviously, talking about the changes in coverage, you already mentioned Kenny Moore, but there are some young players that are in this scheme right now. Talking about the Jalen Jones of the world, and even Nick Cross this year. Who I thought both had pretty solid seasons for Indy. Could you see those two guys, those two players, benefiting as well from just the change of scheme?
Well, certainly, I think that kind of where Gus Bradley kind of had them, where there wasn't a lot of challenging the receivers at the line of scrimmage often, and giving a lot of those free releases and putting a lot of pressure on them to rally and tackle to the ball. it could certainly help them. I do think that is where you kind of look, especially the background that Lou Anarumo comes from the defensive back, is saying, hey, I think they're going to add competition there. I mean, that's something that Chris Ballard mentioned. We got to get better in the secondary. So I think that's a unit where they're certainly not guaranteed to just to run back the same unit and just say the scheme was the problem. But I do think that Jalen Jones was someone that took kind of you had kind of looked back at the secondary, that's a guy kind of along with Nick Cross that took a couple of encouraging steps where you feel good about at least, bringing in competition, but that they could sure win the competition and be out there starting for you week one.
As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Now, what is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
Yeah, you mentioned that the idea of bringing in competition, bringing in some more guys, and obviously Chris Ballard's talking about the idea of bringing, fresh guys into the building and how important that's going to be. But when you look at like some of the guys the Colts have that are set to be free agents, you're talking about the Dio Dangbo, EJ Speed, some of those guys. Are there any guys there? And then also, are there any guys maybe on the open market that you think would be good fits for this type of scheme that you think either guys that have been around that could benefit if the Colts decide to bring them back, or some guys that you would look to add in this system?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I kind of talked about is there's a clear prototype that Lou Anarumo has in his secondary. I think when you're looking at free agent fits and you're looking at draft fits even, you don't see a lot of cornerbacks under 6 foot play significant snaps for Lou Anarumo. So it's usually that 6 foot is where, it's actually shocking the amount of corners that he's played that is 6 foot on the dot. And then the ability to have so arm length has been something that Chris Ballard has kind of, coveted in the past, and certainly Gus Bradley did. A little bit, not as much of a deal for Lou Anarumo, but the weight is something that is a factor. 195 is kind of that threshold. So you're looking for that 6 foot 195 type player. I think for me, obviously, it's going to be, we're probably a ways out to see if a lot of these guys on the open market are signing with their own teams or looking for a new home. And I think that a couple names fit that bill. Christian Fulton from the Chargers is one that comes to mind for me as a guy that fits that mold. Charvarius Ward would probably fit that. Should he decide he wants to leave San Francisco, I assume that they aren't just going to let him walk out the door, considering how good he's been for them. And then you would have to think that there's going to be at least one, maybe two guys from Lou's defense in Cincinnati that are on the open market that he might want to bring with him to Indianapolis.
Yeah, absolutely. And when considering some of the guys the Colts could re-sign, is there anybody that you think they should consider re-signing that you think would fit well and could potentially benefit?
Well, I think that it's going to be tough because it's going to be interesting what kind of market these guys have. I think with, the cap space isn't as large as it has been in previous years from all the extensions that they've signed. So that it's not that the Colts will be struggling to pay guys per se, but I do think that there's going to be some of that. This is the amount that at least for our own guys, this is the amount that we're willing to go. If you're going to go get a deal somewhere else, like we're kind of the theme, it feels like going into this offseason is adding some fresh blood into the locker room. So like, hey, like Dio Dengbo is a guy that in my opinion is going to get a large market, even if the sack production maybe hasn't necessarily been there for his inside-outside versatility. That's something that is not as a big deal so far from my study of Lou Anarumo needing a guy to play inside and outside. That doesn't necessarily need to happen just because he'll walk linebackers up onto the line of scrimmage and dictate protections that way. So I could see a scenario where the Colts probably Grant Stewart, I think, for his special teams ability, but I don't think from the defensive side of the ball, it would be tough to really say this is a guy circled, dotted line, underlined that we need to bring back, because I do think that they could easily find markets somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure. But, you talked about it today a little bit about, there's not necessarily like one position you look at right now. I'll kind of read what you had said. Yeah. There isn't one or two positions that they really need to upgrade. A lot of guys they have can fit, but they need competition everywhere, and talking about the idea of depth. And we kind of talked about this, over some replies but if there was one position that you would say needs to, the Colts maybe need to strongly consider adding a proven guy in there, what position would that be for you?
So free safety, I think that a lot of that was going to be independent of who the Colts hired. I think that they have not really had I think they got some improved safety play from Nick Cross this year, but I don't think that they have that rangy sideline to sideline ball hawk, or red line to red line, however you want to call it, that can patrol the middle of the field. So that'll be something that I think they look to. But I think what I was really trying to say there, which is hard for me to pin one position down in the first place, is the amount of depth. I think that when we looked at the 53-man roster and who made the team last year, I feel like for the past couple of years, especially under Gus Bradley, you see like 10, 11, 12 defensive linemen, and then they're short on corner. They're going to go 5 corners on the 53-man roster. That to me is going to change, because personnel week to week in this defense can look totally different. They'll play a lot of dime, which means 6 DBs. They'll play a lot of big dime, which means that 6 DB would be a third safety. They'll do a lot of different things. Whatever the opponent calls for and the best way to defend them, Lou will do that. So and a lot of that is on the back end. So they'll do whatever they need to defend the opponent. And for that reason, this is like the one scheme I think in the league where like you really want to be focusing on who is that third safety. Isn't just a special teams player for you. That's a guy that might actually contribute on game days, and it might be to stop a quarterback like CJ Stroud. So.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there has been an emphasis by the Colts this offseason, really talking about obviously what Lou's background is, and then a lot of these other guys that focus on defensive backs. So, could this be something where right now, obviously you look at corner and you say, hey, you got 2 guys under contract right now. You have Nick Cross at safety. Could you see the Colts adding, maybe it's not like the, number one out, top 5 corner, but adding some real competition in there, some real guys, whether it's free agency or the draft, or maybe a combination of both, where they're adding, some youth and they're adding some, proven talent in there to really bolster that competition?
Well, let me put the question back on you. Do you think that that's something that they'll look
I
into?
hope so, man.
Yeah.
I don't think you have an option, right? I don't think it's a should you. It's like, who is it going to be at this point?
Exactly. I think that they pretty much came out and say we need to get better in the secondary. So,
Yeah.
so there's someone's going to be there. What that person looks like, I do think that for all of the bargain bin Ballard jokes and some of the stuff about the Colts not willing to spend that extra dollar, I do think in some circumstances it doesn't make sense to give those guys these insanely large contracts, because the one thing that I think about the secondary that we can probably all agree on is that it's so volatile year to year. A guy that had a career year one year is probably, when you compare it to other positions, is not guaranteed to do it again. That's just kind of how this thing works. I think a good example of that has been Josh Norman, I think, all the way back with the Panthers, and then when he was with the football team, there was I think Pat Surtain this year was a great example. He did not have a good year last year, and now he's probably up for Defensive Player of the Year. So it's a really hard position to give multi-year deals, and I think that where we have seen, and what I think we'll likely to see, is kind of stuff that Ballard has done in the past with Stephon Gilmore and Xavier Rhodes, where you get that kind of veteran corner, and I think there's a lot of those out there, and say, hey, we'll sign you to that year, that prove it deal, because we still think you have something left in the tank. And a lot of the times when Ballard has made that bet, it's been right.
Yeah, so you'd probably go primarily more free agency than anything.
I do. I mean, there's certainly a lot in the draft, and I think that you can never rule that out. It'll be interesting to see what they do. I think they're going to look free agency first, because I think that the theme of where this regime is I'm not sure that they can just rely on rookies to go get the job done right now. Like, you certainly always want young talent. Like, you would love to be where Philadelphia is and have Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean in your secondary and feel like you're set for the next 10 years or 5 years, whatever. Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily the case in Indianapolis. And I do think that there's going to be potentially pressure to get a guy that can come in and contribute and push these guys today, not tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, we'll have to see, man, how it does play out. I'll be definitely interested in the next couple months to see what the Colts do when it comes to some of these positions. But I do appreciate you coming on, man. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, find your work, and all you've been doing over there at Blue Stable?
Yeah, so I would say the majority of my work is on Twitter. You don't have to have any, or X. Sorry, you don't have to do any extra clicks. I'm usually right there. I do whenever I think that I have a lot of thoughts running through my brain. I'll be on the Blue Stable as well with some longer form stuff. But for the most part, I'm right on X, so not hard to find.
Well, great. Well, guys, go check him out at Colts Film Room. Do appreciate you, man. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.